theme that I kept coming back to when we were going through the list, and that is this commonplace that you sometimes hear, and I don't know if you all have heard this, that the best religious films are made by non-religious directors, or that this is sort of like this is something to be observed in the landscape of cinema. And I found myself reevaluating that commonplace as I went through the list. But or at least the sense in which that commonplace might be understood. And I wanted to know what you guys think of that sort of phenomenon of many of these classic religious films on the list being made by either non-believers or non-practicing members of, say, Catholicism or whatever religion, whatever branch of Christianity. And what do you think? What was your sort of like? What was your I know you all didn't watch every film on the list individually, but what's your overall impression of kind of the state of the canon of religious cinema in relation to the actual beliefs or non-beliefs of the directors? Maybe starting with David.
Well, I don't know, a few thoughts off the top of my head. One is that like having faith is not the same thing as being a talented artist, for example. And while I think we can maybe say something like the faith can enhance and perfect like who we are as human persons, it's maybe just like an independent variable, like what like artistic skill a given individual has. So I don't know that just sort of like being a practicing Catholic, for instance, gives you a free pass to being like something special in regards to like creating great piece of music or a great movie or whatever. And on that note, I don't know that we've just really had so many Catholic filmmakers, have we? I mean, there have been some across time, but it's almost like, I don't know, 90 something % of movies are made by non-believer people. I'm just making up that number. But one, I guess, if that generalization holds true, it's another thought that there are certainly exceptions. So for me, this film, Tree of Wood and Clogs, was my kind of favorite discovery on the list, made by a practicing Catholic director, as far as I'm aware. And there's just a beautiful holiness that suffuses that whole film. So if the kind of statistically the it skews one way, I think there are definitely exceptions that like having a faith can actually add a real value to the film that a given director makes.
And if I can just maybe specify the question a little bit more before giving the other two of you a chance to answer it. One thing I'm sort of going at with this is not the question of the cinematic quality of films made by non-believers, but how specifically religious some of these films are. Like, as I found myself watching many of these classic great religious films, even something like A Man for All Seasons, I found myself questioning at certain points, I love this movie, but how deeply is this a religious film? Or is this truly about religion, or is it about something else that's sort of connected to religion? So it wasn't so much about, yes, I think we can agree there are many great, great films that involve religion that are made by non-religious filmmakers, but maybe reevaluating that cliche that can a non-religious person really make a great film that is truly at its core, a religious film? And I guess that raises a lot of other questions, but that's sort of the question that I'm wondering about, and wanted to sort of give you the other two of you the chance to talk about that a little bit.
Well, I guess I'll jump in. A couple of the films that I reviewed were The Flowers of St. Francis by Rossellini and Nazarene by Luis Buñuel. And I'll just use those as examples of how this is complicated and interesting. Rossellini obviously was culturally Catholic, raised Catholic, but not really a practicing Catholic by the time he's making movies. He makes The Flowers of St. Francis as a kind of gift to his homeland in response to the horrors of World War II, that what Europe needed was a figure like St. Francis. And Cardinal Roncalli, the future John the 23rd, sees the film and he says, "Oh, my poor boy, you don't know what you've done." And I relate that in some ways to Fellini's 8.5 too. That it's like you can't. It's like the wonderful thing is the faith is so powerful that you can't get away from it, and you keep turning to it, strangely, even in your doubt, as kind of the answer to the questions. Then connected then to Buñuel's Nazarene, that is a weird movie, and I came away really liking that movie. But it's a movie about a radical priest who sort of this idealistic priest who wants to own nothing and just sort of have this radical Christ-like ministry. But my takeaway from that movie is he's the one who needs the ministry at the end. He's the one who's like receives this weird gift of this pineapple from this woman on the road, and it's all very strange. But I think it's like a profound thing from a filmmaker, Buñuel, who said, "I'm an atheist, thank God." It's like strangely like he wanted to make a movie about this like religious man who's kind of inept, but it's very touching to me, and I think a very powerful religious film that it shows a priest who is like trying to serve the Lord, and ultimately the takeaway is the Lord needs to kind of bless him. So I don't know, it's complicated. I totally agree with David's point about artists. I mean, that's it. Art is complicated.
Father Michael?
Obviously, we, just as human beings, we tend to write about and explore best the things we know best. So if we know from inside the faith, that ought, all things being equal, to equip us better to make films about it. And contrariwise, those who are outside it, who lack that subjective knowledge, are at a disadvantage. But all things are not equal, because a lot of non-believers have superior artistic skills and greater capacity for imagination than a given believer might have. So it's complicated. You can't draw up general rules about the matter. Thomas, you mentioned A Man for All Seasons and whether that is really a religious film or not. And I had exactly the same question. I don't know if you've had a chance to read my review yet, but
I did, yeah.
I thought the more I pressed into A Man for All Seasons, which I think is a great movie, the more I began to see that Robert Bolt was indeed, as he said he was, presenting Thomas More much more as a hero of private conscience than as a strictly Christian martyr. It's the fact that it is he who holds this belief that matters, not what it is that he believes. So that made me wonder whether Robert Bolt wasn't slightly at a disadvantage. But then, interestingly, and Robert Bolt isn't a Christian, wasn't a Christian. Robert Bolt also is responsible for the screenplay of The Mission, which I think does quite a good job of exploring questions of forgiveness and violence and penitence and so forth. So even with that one example of Robert Bolt, you've got one where he falls down and one where he remains standing, in my estimation. I think they're both great movies, but one is possibly less obviously successful in exploring an explicitly religious theme.
Another thought building on that is that the non-religious person might in some ways have a slight edge over the practicing religious person, in that they're coming from a place where they are like conscious of and willing to ask questions. Whereas maybe for people on the inside, we're a bit more reticent or forget because things grow too familiar, that there's something deeply mysterious here that we really don't understand and could explore much more deeply. Whereas perhaps from the outside, it's more obvious to see that, or for them to feel that they don't have it figured out, and so then to go exploring.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that maybe this cliche about atheist directors, making the best religious films, it might just have something more to say about how difficult it is to make films about things that you have a very strong stake in, maybe, or maybe it's just about the act of filmmaking itself. I mean, it's notoriously difficult to get a film made, and also in a lot of instances notoriously expensive. So for a religious film to get made, even to begin with, is it already you have to ask questions about where's the funding coming from and who's who's got the stake in this? And
Yeah.
so anyway.